Welcome back to another episode of The Conscious Artist, a safe space for conversations around mental health awareness for musicians, artists, and all human beings. I am your host, Pallavi Mahidara. I'm a concert pianist and teacher, and I am absolutely thrilled that you are joining us today. My hope for this show is that it will give all of us a sense of solidarity and knowledge that we are not alone, and together, through these conversations, we can create more awareness and change for a healthier future. Today, we are chatting with a phenomenal artist. He is a founding member and the first violinist of one of today's leading string quartets in the world, the Dover Quartet. We met nearly 20 years ago at the Curtis Institute of Music, and we have watched each other grow as artists and human beings through the years. I feel very lucky to have known him throughout so many formative stages of our lives, so please join me in welcoming one of my absolute best friends, Joel Link, to The Conscious Artist. Joel, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me, Pallavi.
Of course, it's my pleasure. In truth, this is almost like a daily conversation for us because we talk all the time, but I'm really curious to dive into the topic of string quartet life today because although I've learned so much from you through the years about it and I've seen your evolution in the string quartet, there's really so much more to explore. So could you start us off with a little bit of backstory about your quartet and how the Dovers came to be?
Yeah, sure. Well, obviously in a string quartet, there are four people. I first met Brian Lee, who's our second violinist and a really good friend. We met actually when we were kids at a summer camp called Encore School for Strings, which technically doesn't exist anymore while it's being restarted by actually also by a friend, but it's not quite the same kind of camp where we had met. We met when we were about 13. We became friends. And of course, when you're friends at that age at a camp, you start playing together. And we played chamber music a little bit on and off, sometimes in the summers. And then we happened to apply to Curtis at the same time and both got into Curtis the same year when you did in 2005. So of course, we got to school and we were like, oh, we should play together because of course we didn't know a lot of people. And we have never stopped playing together since. We had kind of a serious quartet when we got started at school, not what became the Dover Quartet, but actually the lower two members of the quartet at the time, Camden and Milena, they came to Curtis a year after Brian and I entered, and they were playing with some other violinists, and we were playing with a different cellist and a different violist for a while. And a couple years into being in school, I think we'd always admired each other's playing from afar, and we were, friendly as well. And I think at a certain point, our lower two members graduated. They were a little bit older than we were, and we stayed at school a little longer. And then they were kind of constantly in flux with two upper musicians, and we just kind of, we joke about it. We say we were bottomless and they were topless when we came together. In short, that's kind of what happened. We got a lot of positive feedback from some of our coaches at the school, and particularly Shmuel Ashkenazi one day kind of spoke to us after playing a little Beethoven for him. And he was like, I really think that you could get married and make a life out of this. So we started having what we call the relationship talk about, is this for real or is this just kind of like a fling or, what's the plan? Are we planning on doing this more long term? And I guess we kind of had that conversation and took a big step forward when we applied as a group to grad school programs out of Curtis. So we wound up going to Rice University for 2 years, which wound up being a really great place for the quartet to be, very different from Curtis. What was really nice about it, and especially different from Curtis, is Curtis has these incredible artists who come in and teach, but they don't always live in town and you don't always get that kind of constant face time. And I think Rice is amazing because they actually require their faculty to be on campus a certain amount of time. And it's really nice when you're, in a quartet that naturally has struggles dealing with three other people, you can always meet up and talk with someone. I think that's a really special thing about Rice University and just the Shepherd School in general. Very nurturing environment. Great place when you're kind of going through the growing pains of new experiences as a quartet and being young and not financially solvent and all that kind of stuff. So perfect place for us. And then we, at the end of our 2 years of the grad program, that was when we had applied to the Banff competition and we won that competition. And after that, we have been essentially very, very busy and traveling and doing all that stuff and living the life, so to speak, ever since.
Wow. I actually forgot that you guys didn't start together in the same group, but that you had different members in different groups. And I'm so glad that you brought up the point of that it's kind of like a marriage. It's kind of like a relationship. How did you guys how did you have that relationship talk and that kind of commitment talk? Because it is that to do a string quartet or to have a permanent kind of chamber group requires basically equal amounts of commitment from each person. And very often, especially at a place like Curtis, where we're kind of trained to think like soloists, to find three other like-minded people that actually want to be part of a team and a collective process in growing something together is not easy to find.
Absolutely. Well, the amazing thing about being at a place like Curtis is you're so inspired by your peers. And while you get your major lesson, as you know, with your teacher once a week, if they're regular and kind of around Philadelphia at the time, and that's kind of the agreement they have, you get to see this person, this amazing artist for 1 hour out of an entire week. And that's very different. What's amazing about your peers is, they may not have the maturity and the wisdom that a lot of these incredible artists have, but you are also dealing with people who are extremely hungry and inspired and just kind of want to be absorbing musical information like a sponge. And I think that's certainly what I realized, I think, over my time, is I was spending a lot of time just in rehearsals in tons and tons of different groups, not even just string quartets. And I think at a certain point I looked at my life and I was like, wow, I think I know what I really enjoy doing and how I enjoy spending my time. I think when I entered Curtis, I had the idea to do a lot of different things, and I was certainly interested in actually conducting quite seriously at a certain point. But when I got
I
to
remember.
school, I think I just realized that I was doing so much playing, and I really felt like I had something to express. And I think I kind of was going through my own journey in a way. And while I think, everyone, probably mostly everybody, goes to Curtis with the idea of, oh, I want to play in front of an orchestra, I think I realized that while that brought me a certain amount of joy, I think the really intimate music making of making music in a string quartet was what felt the most natural and special and meaningful to me at the time, and certainly still. While I certainly miss aspects of, getting to play a concerto in front of an orchestra or play a solo recital or any of those kinds of things, but it's such a well-rounded and beautiful life. But it doesn't come without its sacrifices and its own difficulties, of course.
Of course. I remember you mentioned in the very beginning of Curtis when we joined that you were interested in conducting. And I remember when that started changing and you started talking about how much you love string quartet playing. And I mean, it's too easy to say that you just manifested it, but you kind of are living out the dream that you had back then. And it's really beautiful for me to get to see that over this almost 20-year period of time that we've known each other. By the way, I totally agree with you in terms of what you're talking about with playing string quartets. Like, that's how I feel about playing chamber music in general. It is definitely my favorite form of making music because there's just this beautiful collaborative aspect that exists. And I feel like the magic that happens on stage when you play chamber music it's really hard to explain with words. And so I'm really curious to know, what is it that you love about playing string quartets?
I'm sure every day you get a different answer, but I would say the underlying thing that always rings pretty true for me is I love being a part of something that's a little bit greater than myself. You know what I mean? Like something greater than myself, but still
Yeah.
incredibly individual and personal. I mean, the beautiful thing about being in a quartet is it's four soloists, and it's not that you're always going to be
Yeah.
the primary, most important material, but what you say is only said by you. And the care and concern that you take with every note, whether it's primary, secondary, tertiary, it doesn't really matter. It all comes from you and your individuality and your musicianship, and you can choose to be as invested as you want. And I think there's something incredibly special about witnessing, whether it's an entire group or a particular person in a group who you can tell just has that investment to every note, regardless of its importance. I think it's just like a really special aspect of team playing and a special aspect of just kind of learning about just what a difference a supporting role oftentimes can make. I know, like, in coaching a lot of groups, a lot of times you have someone who has like the chuck, chuck, chuck kind of line. And sometimes it can be frustrating to see. I think people feel like if they're not playing the melody, it's like, this isn't really that important. And I can kind of phone it in. And I will always tell them, like, just like never phone anything in. Either you care about it or you don't. And
Right.
I think for me, that's the beauty of quartet, is there's kind of importance around every turn, and you're kind of a part of the process at all points, regardless of your role. So yeah, it's just incredibly complex. And the music, obviously, I think that's the other thing in string quartet, is the repertoire is kind of non-pareil. I mean, it's like there's nothing quite like it, and it's like such a responsibility to decide what you're going to actually perform in a season, because Haydn alone wrote like 60 or 70 string quartets, so you're not going to probably play those all in your lifetime. So at a certain point, you want to at least be able to offer them professionally over your lifetime. So it's your responsibility to kind of go through all of them and to choose the ones that mean the most to you, and to be able to offer those in a program, or to find a piece that you feel like is a diamond in the rough that nobody really plays, but it really speaks to you, and it allows you to really highlight your personal artistry. And I really like that.
Thank you for sharing that. I love that you said it's four soloists coming together, because I think that's a very important point, both musically, but also literally and personally, that you're also juggling four perspectives and four opinions within the music and also aside from the music. So I'm curious to know, like, how have you approached, you and your group members, for example, how have you guys approached each feeling seen and heard as individual human beings, as individual artists, and with your individual perspectives within the music that you're playing?
If I had the full answer to that, life could be different. I think that's a constant struggle. And I think, this is kind of where it becomes more like a mix of the business and the personal. Of course, the business is being able to rehearse and perform at a certain level in the concert and to be able to achieve what you want to that end, I suppose. Of course, when you're working with people, like when you're trying to be kindly critical, I think, depending on what people bring to the rehearsal every day, and that's something I've really noticed over the years is, you can say something the same way several times in a row, and every day you're probably going to get a different reaction from someone. And it makes you realize that how I actually say something is important, but it's not everything. A lot of it's how someone is able to take in the information due to their circumstances or what they're dealing with mentally that day. Everybody's different. Not everybody shares to the same level. Not everybody knows what's going on. And I might know what's going on in one person's life much more than the two other people or some scenario like that. And it can feel like when you start to say anything and like someone is very prickly back that you start, I'm the kind of person, I think, there are also two different kinds of people. I start to introspectively think like, man, I must have said something in a poor way to elicit this response. But that's very far from true. And you can be very curated with how you say things and still not get the response back that you need. And you have to be able to give people that space. I think, in terms of being able to manifest, it is four soloists with four very strong opinions, hopefully, coming together. And that's why we love each other and also hate each other sometimes, is the strong opinions. But that's what you want in music making. You don't want a half style convictions. You want when you say something musically, you want to be able to come out and be really strong with your opinion. So I've always respected, even if it's very different from mine, a great strength of opinion. But it's also, you got to be able to sit and talk about stuff. And I think that is where it gets tricky. And we've always managed it. It can really be tough. I think you have to learn to really give people space and to learn to not take things personally, to be able to keep that conversation kind of open at all times with your colleagues. Otherwise, you start to make assumptions about people and the resentment really starts to creep in. And oftentimes it can get to a point that's far beyond a place where you can really work on it in a sense. I think at a certain point, you just kind of assume someone is something that you've kind of created in your head for this person to be. And it doesn't really matter what anyone says. It's not really about reality. It's often about perception. And I think that can be tough. Everyone grows at different rates. Everyone shares at different rates. Everyone is able to be vulnerable differently. You just learn a lot about people. I feel like oftentimes string quartet has felt like to me, aside from the musical stuff, which is obviously amazing and incredible, it has also sometimes felt like a study in human psychology and just kind of understanding people. And I've certainly learned a tremendous amount about myself and other people through the process and still learning.
I was literally just going to say that it sounds very much like it's sometimes not even about the music in terms of managing the quartet on a day-to-day basis, but more about learning basics of human psychology and in how to communicate well, how to regulate yourself, your own emotions well, and how to, as you say, like maybe not take things personally. Let's say like, one group member is not having a great day and they lash out about something. Well, that could happen with any friend. That could happen with any relationship, with a friendship, with a partner, with a parent, with a teacher, with a student, right? Like that could happen in any kind of human relationship.
Oh, absolutely.
Because we are human and we're not given the tools, most of us growing up, to handle difficult emotions, to learn how to regulate those emotions and learn how to not personalize everything and to be able to hold space for non-judgment, hold space for those that are different from us, hold space for different ways of processing, different ways of understanding, different ways reacting or responding to a situation, right?
Oh, totally. I was kind of lightly touching on, you don't know what kind of baggage people bring into a rehearsal. And it can be so much so as, let's take a off the cuff example. Say that I am unhappy with how Camden is playing something. And I say something to the effect of, oh, maybe you could try it this way, or I'm not a fan of this. Like, would you consider blah, 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 blah. But maybe he's in a mental place where he's feeling like he's struggling with his own playing, just for example. So it's like, he's already very sensitive about something and not feeling good about something. And then when someone even says something, even in a very kind and well curated way, it doesn't really matter. You're already in your head and feeling really bad about a certain thing. And if you don't really share like, hey, totally. I'm just kind of like struggling about it. I think it's really helpful. Something I've thought about is these days, I feel like offering people just a little bit of context as to where you are in your headspace can be incredibly helpful. Of course, our mission is aligned. We just want things to sound as best as possible. And I hear things that he doesn't, and he would hear things that I don't. But say I'm hearing something and it's playing and I say it, I think he would know that we both want the same thing, but all that he can hear at the moment is that it's a personal attack on how he's doing something, and he's trying, of course, his very best. So you can understand from his perspective, he's lashing out. He's like, man, I'm really trying. And it's like, I really thought I was doing this thing, or I don't really know how I feel about what you're saying. And then it kind of becomes like an argument rather than just being like, hey, totally fair point. I'm just really struggling with doing stuff. If we can just move on, and I'll be working on this stuff, and maybe we can talk about this in a day or two. And just to give yourself that kind of space and having that kind of trust in your colleagues where you can really share where you are in a vulnerable space to give people an idea of where you are, because I'm not a mind reader. Brian's not a mind reader. Camden's not a mind reader. Julianne's not a mind, it's just not what it is. It's like, you have to kind of be able to offer some perspective. And, the odd thing about being in a quartet is we're all, in a sense, very close, but also because we're so close on so many things, we also, I think, for our own selves, we need to keep a certain amount of distance from each other, because otherwise you have no distance from these people. and it's not even personal, but it's like you need some place where these people don't know everything about you. I mean, you think about it, it's like, it's silly, but like, my colleagues know what I like to eat, what I don't like to eat. I'm sure that we could go to any restaurant and I could ask any, especially, less so with Julianne because she's very new. But with the other guys, like, I think that they could probably, with like 93% assurity, guess most things I'm going to order on a menu. You know what I mean? And it's like, it's weird to know that these people know such insignificant, but also like deeply personal things about yourself. So I think we all search for finding a little bit of space from each other, and we all do that in different ways. And for some people, the way that someone might do it is very different from the way, and they feel like that's like not cool or not nice. But it's like, everybody just needs a different kind of space, and like just allowing for a lot of variation, I think, within how people function. It's actually, if you're willing to look at it like an insight into psychology and how people work, it's actually tremendously fascinating if you can get past the sometimes very frustrating parts of what it means.
Yeah, it sounds, I mean, you're literally saying everything that we talk about in terms of romantic relationships, in terms of friendships. Like, communication is key. We're not mind readers. Most of us are not able to just assume what the other person is experiencing through the day. And maybe something happened on the way over to rehearsal and there was a traffic accident and somebody was very unkind to them and they internalize it. And then they're having this really horrible day. And then, another member says something with all good intentions, but the person who experienced that traffic accident is having a horrible day. And if they don't say anything, or if they're not able to communicate it in the same way that another person might, then there could be conflict. And this is exactly what we deal with in romantic relationships. This is exactly what we can deal with in friendships, right? So it makes a lot of sense. And I guess that is literally why people say it's like a marriage. It's like a relationship between four people.
Right. Well, a marriage without some of the key aspects that hold people together. So, or hopefully. So
No, but even the concept of being so close and needing space, even in romantic relationships, they say like you need a healthy balance of self with another, but you cannot lose yourself.
Right. No, totally. And I'm sure we've all been in a relationship or relationships where, whether it's you or the other person, someone feels smothered, right? And that's just like, in
Absolutely.
another way, that's just saying like, usually when someone hears that they're feeling smothered, it feels like what the other person who's doing the smothering, so to speak, would hear is, oh my gosh, this person doesn't want me around them as much as I want to be around them. But really what I
Right.
think that person is trying to say is like, I love being around you, and you need to trust that that person loves to be around you. But it's like, I need some more space for myself. And that's not, it's not a personal thing. It's just everybody needs a certain amount of space from everybody. You can't have someone who's just like kind of attached to you at everything. And maybe some people make it easier because they're maybe less, they force you to be less vulnerable, or they challenge different aspects of you. Every person challenges each person in a different way. You can love someone. And I mean, I have so many people in my life that I really love, but I can only spend a certain amount of time around. And then there are other people that I really love also. And it's not more love or less love. It's just some people, the vibe is a little different, and it maybe challenges me less is ultimately what it comes down to. So it's a little easier and maybe a little less, I feel a little less vulnerable and less raw around that person. So yeah, I think, even just the way people have taken personal time or even on the road, like some people might be like, oh, let's have a meal together, but other people might want to have their meals alone, but like do something else or do an activity together, right? So it's like people like different things. And you realize that trying to take the personal aspect out of it, it winds up being really, really helpful. And just, I don't know, I think I'd rather just choose to live a life in string quartet where I trust that the people want to be with me until I can really feel otherwise and until it feels deeply personal, like pretty bar none. But even, of course, that is a deeply subjective place as well. So I would say I think it really helps to assume the best of your colleagues. I think the moment that you can't assume well of your colleagues anymore, that becomes a very scary place in which to be, both for you and for the people that you're doing that to.
Oh man, I can imagine. And like what you're saying, you essentially are trying to find moments to reconnect with yourself, right? Because you are always together. You're rehearsing together all the time. You're traveling together all the time. You're performing together all the time. Of course, there's a need for some quiet alone time. And of course, that will also change from person to person because we're all different individual human beings. And, some people like introverts really need that time alone to be able to reconnect with themselves, to be able to recharge, because being with other people all the time, even people that you love, is draining. And then you have extroverts who are absolutely filled and recharged by other human interaction. So that also is another aspect that comes into play, I'm sure.
Yeah, those chemistries. It's also that, in a quartet, you lose so much of your individuality while you still retain some of it, certainly by comparison to like an orchestral musician. And of course, depending on where you sit in the orchestra, if you're in a string section, you're in the front, it's maybe a little bit different. But I think that's the other really interesting thing is you feel oftentimes that your social life on the road or people that you know through the quartet are friends originally maybe of some other member, right? And you don't feel like you have people who are just your people. And I think a lot of times it's very easy to feel lost in the shuffle and to feel like you're struggling to find your own identity in this unit because when we travel places, I think probably a significant amount of people who certainly are fans like know us individually and all that stuff, but I think a lot of people are like, oh, I love the Dover Quartet or something like that, right? And it's like I can't tell you who's in it, but I just love that group, right? So you're a part of this
Mm.
collective that's not really just you, but you are at least 25% of this entity in terms of what you bring. It's a really interesting thing. I think that's also a part of it is just sometimes needing your own identity and space and friends in this kind of collective thing. It's a little hard to find where that balance is. And I think some people need more of themselves and some people don't need so much of themselves. Again, it's so individual in the way that people kind of process all of this information, and both on the emotional side and the business side and all that kind of stuff is just so wildly different. So you just kind of learn about it, I guess, over time. And of course, you have a member change or colleague change, then the entire dynamic within the group changes, and then that also is its own can of worms in a sense. It's like you kind of have to relearn how to be in this entity and where you fit.
Wow, this is so interesting the way you said this, that you are at least 25% because actually, yeah, you are 25% and you're 100%.
Right.
And it didn't really occur to me until you said it just now, this aspect of identity or identity loss, that you are part of a group, you are part of a collective unit. And people may or may not know who you are individually, but you need to be able to hold on to your individuality and your identity as an artist and as a human being to like not lose yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a part of me these days. I've been asked to give a couple more recitals and, I mean, this because we talk a lot, but there's a part of me that has always enjoyed doing that. But I've never really had time because the quartet has been such a huge focus. But there is a part of me now these days that it's like, I would like to make sure that I have things that I'm doing for myself.
Yeah.
And it's not out of wanting attention for myself really at all. I would say one of the main reasons I want to do it is because I want to keep improving and I want to keep learning more repertoire and doing things like that. But there is, I would say, there is a small part of me that it's really nice to be able to feel like you're doing something that you can be even more artistically in charge of, which is funny because you do get so much of that in a string quartet already. But it's just nice to kind of spice up your life and to be able to have more breadth to the things that you do and to just kind of let people know, oh, wow, he can play in a string quartet and he can play a solo recital and he can play in an orchestra or sit in the back of an orchestra or sit in the front of an orchestra. Like to be able to have this breadth in what you do and for people to still see you as someone that can do different things or has interests in doing other things, I think is also really nice. And it is a way of getting a little bit of delineation and feeling like you have your own voice. I was speaking in the beginning about how it's so great that you can be a part of something bigger than yourself, but also still quite individual. But that can kind of go in and out. And of course, when you've been doing anything for a really long time, like the Dover Quartet has existed as our fifth. I guess we started in 2008. So this is the end of our 15th year or 16th year or something like that.
Wow.
It's been a long time. And of course, not, like for the first 5 years of that, we were trying to build a career. But I'd say for a solid since 2013, the pandemic, of course, happened, and that stopped a little bit of time. But it's been like 10 years of being a professional touring quartet, essentially. And, once you've been doing it for long enough, 10 years is a pretty long time. It's also nice to feel like you can, I don't want to say that it gets old, but the level of excitement and feeling like you're a kid in a candy shop is a little bit different, just simply because you've experienced all of these things before. And I can remember how nervous and how scared I was the first time we were going to play at Carnegie, right? Like our debut. And then, we played at Carnegie for maybe this is going to be our third or fourth or fifth time next year. And it doesn't feel quite the same. So you're looking for something different to be able to express. And I think we're all searching for that excitement also in our lives and in our performance field. And everyone has a different hunger for that feeling. Some people want to feel like, oh, I feel like I get to do all this stuff and I can feel just so comfortable living my life the way that I want. And other people are like, I want to feel like a little more adrenaline and this and that, and like a little more living life on the edge. And everyone just has a different balance of all that kind of stuff.
But also, like, a variety of experiences in our lives is what gives us depth as artists, because experience is what broadens our mind and challenges us to grow and to find new perspectives. And I'm sure that being able to do different things besides string quartet playing actually enhances your ability to bring higher awareness in your music and in your artistry.
Yeah. Well, anytime that you collaborate with anyone, you're going to take and leave certain things from that person, right? So like say you and I were to play a recital, we would talk about stuff. We would musically probably agree on a lot of stuff, probably disagree on some things. And of the things we disagree on, I would probably sit back and think over a period of time afterwards about those things and mull it in my head and maybe come away with either everything that Pallavi said is horrible, everything that Pallavi said is amazing, and I've come to see the light, or I like some of the stuff and I don't like some of the stuff.
And all of those options are okay.
Of course, all of those options are okay. I would say more times than not, I think I wind up in the third, like where I love some things and other things I'm like, I just don't agree with that and I don't love that. And that's totally fine. And that's like what makes me the musician I am, what makes you the musician that you are and the artist that you are. But I think it's great because then, say we play a recital, then I come back to the quartet. The things that I like that resonated with my musicianship and my artistry that I love that you said that I hadn't thought of before, then I can now bring this to the quartet and the quartet becomes richer, right? So I think that there's a lot of value in working with other people and doing some things outside while, of course, what a string quartet can look like and be can look like a billion different things. Not every string quartet has to be like ours, touring a significant portion of the year. I think a lot of people want to be that string quartet. That's maybe a separate conversation. But, some quartets are in residence at a school and do a tremendous amount of outreach and that kind of thing. Or some only do modern music and might only do quartet concerts for 6 months of the year. And then the other 6 months, they totally don't do it and they all do other things. It can really look like whatever you want it to look like. And I think that that's also the interesting thing about it in terms of all that kind of stuff. We've been one of these, groups that's been quite busy and it hasn't really allowed us to have the time to do outside stuff. And we were all extremely committed to do that for super long. And I think at this point, we've done it for a long time. We're looking to kind of slow things down a little bit. And now this opportunity for doing other things and more time that we're at our teaching residency, which of course is not like every day from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Now I'm thinking like, man, now I have these bigger pockets of time that I'm home teaching, but I'm not teaching absolutely every day. I wonder if I can do some other things that are really fulfilling for myself, both as an artist, as a person, as a human, all that kind of stuff. And it's exciting. But yeah, it's certainly different than how things have been. But I think, while a certain amount of it is me doing something for me, I also think of it as it's going to always draw attention to the quartet because that's who I've been for 15 years and who I am.
Right.
So it's exciting to be able to kind of bring both new influences with people that you collaborate and just the experience of being able to do things outside and to be able to seek out other avenues of learning music, playing with other people, even just the visibility of doing something outside of the quartet. is always going to be really great for the quartet, I think, in the proper context. And that's definitely a direction, with how our quartet is taking shape at the moment with being in residence at Curtis, and the idea of kind of, I think we're looking for 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off kind of thing. It now have these 2 weeks off where I'm, teaching, that I have an opportunity to be able to pepper in some other things. And yeah, it's exciting to see how that's going to come back to the quartet and change things and hopefully enrichen the experience for all of us, hopefully.
That's really nice to hear. I know that it comes with its challenges for sure, and I want to get more into that. But first, I want to touch upon something that you mentioned, which I think anyone who follows your quartet knows, which is that you've recently had a change in members. This was the first time that your group has had a change. Now, in many string quartets, change is inevitable at some point, whether it's because of longevity and death, or it's simply that, people's lives change. Maybe somebody gets married, somebody has kids, they move to a different country, they change their mind about what they want because we're not the same people that we were 20 years ago and 15 years ago and 10 years ago. So people may also choose to move on. And so I'd really love to talk a little bit about how the process is in a string quartet when you change members, because it's not the same as somebody retiring from an orchestra. It's a much, much bigger role that a member plays, especially when there's a change that occurs.
Yeah, we could talk about this for a really long time. I suppose you're maybe wanting to know like what the process is in terms of like a search process, or do you mean like more emotionally?
Honestly, whatever you feel comfortable sharing. I think it's, helpful for anyone that's interested in string quartet life. And I think it's also relevant for even something as simple as like work life and friendships.
Totally. Well, I'll start with the more kind of practical application. I think in terms of we hadn't experienced a member change, and I think that's incredibly rare these days to have original membership for nearly like 14, 15 years.
Right.
I think it came as a real shock, to be totally honest, while also kind of not a shock, if I'm also being honest about that too. It's one of those things I feel like in quartet, everyone is both happy and not so happy at the same time. And it just kind of becomes a matter of what the pro versus cons are and whether that balance is right for you. Of course, life does change shapes. I think, we were told in January, and I think we were shocked. I think certainly for the three of us that were planning to continue, I think the thought to not continue certainly crossed our minds quite strongly, simply because I think you get together with your original members and that's what you've been doing for so long. It's very hard to imagine a life without that, even with the
Right.
negatives that exist. And there were. But I think, we all kind of came together and we decided to continue and be starting a search. And we read with several people. To be totally honest, for a lot of different reasons, we hadn't been able to really have anything concrete in plan until quite late in the summer. And we were worried about being able to have a season for the 22-23 season this past season. And I think the idea was floated to Milena about sticking around and potentially helping us through the fall. And I don't think that she was really open to that, from what I understand. So we found ourselves in a place where I suggested the idea of maybe we can find someone who would be open to subbing in for a year, someone who we like and would be open to being able to just kind of be a stopgap so we could continue the search process. And we found an amazing colleague and friend who honestly did us just a tremendous solid this year and has been an absolute champ, Hezekiah Leong, who was in the Rolston Quartet for many years and just could not have been a better person to have had this year in the quartet, both as a person, player, everything. Well, I can't say enough wonderful things about him. So I know we will all be eternally grateful to everything that he essentially kind of saved us from having to cancel a tremendous amount of things this year. So it's actually just very special what he was able to do for us. It allowed us to continue our search process. We continued through the fall, and then we offered Julianne the job. We announced that she was joining I believe we announced in February, and she starts in September, which is really, really exciting and definitely a new phase. It's going to be really different than having toured and worked with, Milena for a bunch of years, but I think also a really positive, different, and something that we're excited about. So that's, I think, on the search process side. I will say it was very difficult at the end of, I guess, our 21-22 season, when Milena had announced she was leaving, because, of course, we have our touring schedule set quite far in advance. And to read with people on the road is not easy, when you don't have a lot of time to be able to be in your place, to be able to have people come to you. So actually, some people met us on the road even to read, which was kind of cool, but also a little bit stressful.
Wow, this is a really interesting point that you made, that the three of you actually considered whether you should continue with the group, because the idea of playing with someone else when you've been playing with an original member for so long was a really hard one to stomach in the beginning, right? And this kind of draws back to the concept of collective unit versus individual identity, right? In this way, if it's four individual beings in the group, in the quartet that are the original members, and one of them leaves, it feels like, well, then what's the point of continuing? But I guess if you think about it as the Dover Quartet as a whole, and I don't know, it's kind of like a car, like you have to replace the bumper, or you have to replace the wheel, or you have to replace the engine. I mean, you need that part to function, but the car, while it might be a little bit different, it perhaps can be even better. Who knows, right?
Absolutely. I think that, yeah, it touches also on the earlier thing about, being 25% of the group. And I think you're a very wise and accurate statement of you're both 25% and 100%. I think that never became so real to me as in that moment, in a way. I think one always sees oneself, or I'll say I always see myself as just, oh, I'm just a fourth of this entity, because of course we also deal every day with the business aspect. I pay for a fourth of this and a fourth of that, and all that kind of stuff as well. But everybody is so much more than that, and it does go beyond the difficult. And I think even if you've had difficulty with a member that says that they're going to leave, and maybe it's a personal reason that they're leaving, you somehow are caught in this really, even if you're like, man, I didn't really enjoy being around this colleague very much, or I don't think this colleague really enjoyed me. I think in that moment, all you can think about are the good moments and all the things you're going to miss. And I think that that's like an interesting part of the experience is you suddenly are aware of the positives. Memory has a way of doing that, right?
Right.
Think back to a thing, maybe an event in your life that you think of as very favorably, but maybe you had like a horrible sore throat the entire time during this thing. You don't remember the sore throat. What you remember is the experience of what you were feeling. And somehow the sore throat, disappears, right? And you just kind of remember like, oh, remember that time we were on this roller coaster, and you don't remember whatever fun experience it could have been. And I think with memory, we do that. And I think even with people, we do that. Say you want to kind of break up with or you're not sure you're even that happy in your current relationship with your boyfriend or girlfriend, and then like that person dumps you or something, then you're kind of in this place of like, oh my gosh, but I'm going to miss this, that, and the other. And maybe you weren't really quite ready to make that decision. Yeah, I think that part is really complicated. From the emotional side more, I think everyone is both some version of extremely happy and extremely unhappy in a quartet, because it's not a perfect thing, and there's a lot of stuff to have to be able to juggle. And I think there was a certain element of that for me. I think there was a certain element of that for Milena. I think there was a certain amount of that probably for all of us. And I think, and you know this since we're obviously very good friends, I've come to do a lot of thinking this year about how I could have done things better over the past 14 years. And of course, those are many. But I think one is being able to be open and vulnerable with your colleagues at all times, no matter what that means, and just to be able to kind of share with people where you are and to be able to be really honest about that is very difficult. Another thought that I've kind of had is I think that one of the amazing things about the Dover Quartet that helped us achieve what we have achieved from a business and musical place is that we did form when we were really young. And I think that that is truly unique, because I think quartet is generally considered a more mature person's art, so to speak. So I think it's very hard.
Right.
Also, on that flip side, it's tough as a young quartet because people see you as young and probably volatile, and that you're going to explode and implode and whatnot. And that does happen, I'd say, like a majority of the time. So I understand why that exists. Doesn't happen to everyone, and it did not happen to us. And we stayed together for a very, very long time. Obviously, we're together with new membership now, but the quartet is still happening. I think the bad thing about the Dover Quartet is that the quartet started when it was so young. And what I mean by that is, I think as kids, think about it as it's like no matter how old we are and how old we get, and at some point, hopefully we'll grow old, not necessarily in the same home together, but we'll grow old and see each other get older. And at some point, you're always going to see me as that probably 16-year-old at Curtis, right? There's going to be an element of you that has me indelibly marked as this person, even if we're in our 80s or 90s, right? And can barely move. I think, in a quartet that kind of happened with us, in my opinion, after doing a lot of soul searching. I think we all got together when we were very young, and we're all indelibly marked in each other's memories as these, whether it's 16, maybe even for Brian and me, we see each other as the 13-year-olds that we were when we met at summer camp, right? And I'm not going to lie, when you're 13 or 16 or 15 or however old we were when we met, I think I met Kim and Milan when I was 17, you do some dumb stuff, right? You're not exactly like the most honed version of who you're going to become, right? And you're not a full adult, and you're still developing and learning stuff, and you're living alone for the first time and learning what that means and trying to be responsible for the first time. You just do some stupid stuff, right? I think for us, I think that we oftentimes still see each other as those people and haven't really allowed each other to grow, and to try and see each other's growth. It's part of the reason I think that we don't always enjoy going home to our families. It's like I can't get away from who I was when I was a child, and the dumb crap I did when I was a child. I still hear about it, and I'm a different person now, right? And I think that that same thing has happened, or just happens in a quartet too, because you spend so much time that the change is so glacial, because you're around these people all the time. You don't get a break from these people to see like, whoa, I haven't seen this person for 8 months, and wow, they've done this, or they've changed this aspect of their personality. You can't really see that stuff. You just kind of see the person is always that person.
The perspective is too close.
Right. The perspective is exactly a much better way of saying it. So I think that that's like a huge aspect. And I think that's really difficult. And I can say, I think from my stepping back and seeing it, I'm sure that my colleagues grew more than I noticed. And you have to allow for that. And you have to want to also see it in your colleagues. And I think that not everybody wants to see it in their colleagues. And honestly, not everyone grew that much. I think of my colleagues over 15 years, so to speak. And I think, some people grew more and some people grew less. And I think that's the interesting thing is like, you get together in a quartet. At one point, you make this commitment to stay together, but it's also people do change over 15 years, and some more and some less. And you have to try and be open to the fact that people are changing and growing. And you have to also want to see it in people. And you can't create a narrative of this person hasn't grown, or this person is still the piece of crap that I went to school with, or like whatever it is. It's like you have to be willing to see more, and you have to be willing to give them the benefit of the doubt, and willing to see them for more than you think that they can be sometimes. And I think that's what we all want, and that's what we all need, right? So yeah, it's a special opportunity. Again, you're a close friend of mine, just how tough things can be and how frustrating things can be. And for me, it's not about the importance of me sharing what has been hard for me, because as you know, there have been many and some pretty horrible things. But in the end, in order to achieve a solution to make things work, whether it's in your marriage or in a musical relationship or something like this, you can either choose to need to be right, or you can choose to want to be a part of the solution. And I want to be the person who always wants to be a part of the solution. I think when I was much younger, I cared a lot about being right. And I think if you're perceptive enough, you can tell that people don't like being around those people for very long.
Right.
And I think I learned that pretty early on. And I can honestly say now that by this point, I am very happy to be like, you know what? You're right. I didn't do this right. How can we make this better for the future? And can you give me the space to like be able to forgive me for what I've done? And can we move on? I want to acknowledge this, but like, let's just put this in the rearview mirror and like trust that we're going to be better. And let's just hold each other accountable. So yeah, I think that's been one of my epiphanies this year is either you can be right or you can be a part of the solution. Sometimes those things align, but again, it's not the same when it revolves around is your being right for yourself. That's you seeking external validation from others. And that's not you giving yourself the validation of it's okay to make a mistake. I want to know that it's okay for myself to make a mistake, but I also don't want to be okay with myself making the mistake. Yes, I want to be like, it's fine to make the mistake, but come on, let's learn from this mistake and also try to make it better, not only for myself, but also for others moving forward. And I think that that's like a really important and healthy balance to be able to have, to not knock your knees out when you make a mistake, to be able to be like, look, I failed. I'm going to be better next time. And it's motivation to move forward and to be better.
I love this. This is such an important point you've highlighted. Thank you for saying it in this way. And it really does tie back to human relationships. We talk about so much in personal romantic relationships, in a marriage. Like you can be with 30 versions of the same person over a 30-year marriage, right? Because we change and we grow. And in your case with a string quartet, it's like what you were saying, that you guys have known each other since you were 16 or 17 or 18 as a group. And to allow space and give grace for the evolution of each person takes a lot of maturity and insight. And that's not easy. I mean, you and I are having this conversation in our mid-30s with much more awareness than either of us had 20 years ago. I mean, I also was, an annoying 18-year-old when we met, and I actually don't see you the same way anymore. And I know that also has come from a place of me not wanting to be seen as the 18-year-old I was, or the 20-year-old I was, or the 25-year-old I was. I also want people to give me grace to acknowledge my present state, to not project my old self on my current place where I am today. And I feel like with your quartet, not only is it an individual evolution, but perhaps now with Julianne, which is so exciting that you found someone so wonderful to move forward. This is now the next chapter of your string quartet's stage in life, right? Like the evolution of your string quartet. This is a new chapter, the new evolution of the group. And I, for one, am honestly really excited to see how you guys develop as a group and as people through this, and to see how your music develops, because I think it's really just another exciting chapter. It's just part of life.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, one can only hope it's a new and more functional chapter, I think, in our future. And yeah, I think with personal growth, it's one of those things that happens to you, I think, at first, but you also have to want it to be something that you want to have happen. And it's something that you have to acknowledge. It doesn't come easily. It comes with a lot of thought, sometimes some pain, but I think hopefully what comes out on the other side is just like a more streamlined, healthy version of yourself. And I think if you're willing to undergo the deep soul searching and deep diving into your own psyche and just really being honest with yourself and being able to admit certain things to yourself, I think the payout is pretty great. What's life if we can't keep growing? And I've really relished in this opportunity that has otherwise been a darkish time for me. I've really relished in it being a moment that I can really examine some things in my life and make some great improvements. And I'm excited about the future. I'm excited to see what I'm going to be like, in a couple of years, hopefully, and how I can be a bigger light and a stronger light to people around me, and to be able to, through my actions and through my words and things, to be able to more accurately express my intentions and what I feel.
I could not agree more. I think that's such a beautiful way to put it. I relate so much with what we've spoken about today. And I know that you and I have spoken a lot about the hardships we've both faced in our lives the last few years. And I'm really excited, really, truly excited to see how the quartet develops and where you also personally go and how we get to continue supporting each other. So, Joel, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for taking the time to share with us from your perspective and to give a little insight, because I know that so many people have had similar experiences in any sort of relationship. Like we said, a string quartet is like a marriage, like a personal relationship. And it comes with its challenges and it comes with its beauties. And the Dover Quartet is an amazing example of what it means to make that commitment going forward. And it's like we said, it's not easy to make that commitment from the beginning and say, hey, I'm going to invest everything that I have into this. And there are going to be losses of time and of finance and personal losses, but the experiences and the lessons that I will learn from that and the growth that I will receive from that is invaluable. So thank you so much for being here and talking to us today.
Thanks for having me, Paula. It'll be always a pleasure.
Thank you all so much for listening. I am truly grateful for the support from each and every one of you. If you would like to submit any questions or topics for us to address on the show, you can send us a message on our Instagram page @ConsciousArtistPodcast. Help us to spread more awareness by sharing this episode with your friends, your colleagues, your teachers, and your students. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Sending you all so much love and strength to tackle this week, and we'll see you next Monday for another episode of The Conscious Artist.